Good afternoon. My name is Ron Perry. I'm a reference librarian here at the library, and on behalf of the Friends of the Library, I'd like to welcome you to another year of Out of the Lunchbox. This is a program that's been going on about as long as we've been in this building, so we're glad you could make it. Before we get started, I'll just mention that the next program will be October the 3rd, and the topic will be the Occupy movement, and the speaker will be Dana Nelson. That will be on October the 3rd. And I would also like to take a couple of minutes to invite you to some upcoming programs here at the library. If you're not aware of them, on September the 18th, in a couple of weeks, Molly Ringwald will be coming to talk to the Salon at 6:15. The Salon at 6:15 program, if you're not familiar with it, it's easy to remember. It starts at 6:15. It's located at 615 Church Street. And Molly Ringwald will be coming in a couple of weeks. Then also on October the 9th, this won't be in this room, but it will be up in the Grand Reading Room, Caroline Kennedy will be coming to do a book signing. And she'll be here at 1 o'clock. And you may want to come early and hear a concert. We have a series of concerts going on right now. It's called the Courtyard Concert Series. And we've had 4 of them so far. We've got five of them left, and it's music that will appeal to anybody. The next few weeks we've got Riders in the Sky is coming next week, and then we have a classical cellist, some bluegrass, some Latin music, and ending up on October 9th with rockabilly. Jason D. Williams will be playing rock. That'll be an interesting combination of rockabilly music and Caroline Kennedy. So hopefully you can make it. And if you like classical music, we have the Virtuoso Showcase. Is classical guitar music. It's on Sunday afternoons from 2:30 to 4:30 in September and October. We'll also be in this room. So hope you can make it for those. And finally, I'd like to, I don't know if it's been announced officially yet, so, but the literary award winner this year is Margaret Atwood. And she will be coming to give a talk on October 27th on Saturday, and that will also be in this room. So we hope you can make it for that. There's a lot going on in the library, and we hope you can join us. So for today's program, since this is the first day of the year, we've never really given Dr. Wood credit, I think, and I've never properly introduced him. So I looked up on the website, and it listed some current philosophical projects that Dr. Wood is working on. I just wanted to share those with you. For one thing, he's reworking and displacing Heidegger's treatment of time within fundamental ontology. A second project he's working on is developing a non-prescriptive post-humanistic approach to ethics. And another project is providing an account of truth that does justice both to its normative, existential, and metaphysical dimensions. I think a good program would be for Dr. Wood to just come and speak for himself and tell us what is it that philosophy professors are doing these days. So hopefully he can do that. So in addition to all those projects, he also runs a series of philosophy talks at the Nashville Public Library called Out of the Lunchbox. So will you help me welcome Dr. David Wood?
Well, yeah, thank you, Ron. I wasn't sure what that meant either. Some of those topics seem really complicated. And I want to just start today by thanking all the people who made this possible, especially Susan Chambers from Friends of the Library, and Larry Price, and Georgia Varble, all from this library here. And also especially Alan Berry, a major philosophy department benefactor, for his continuing support of this program. It means a lot to me and to all of us. Well, our format for today is a little bit different from what some of you may be used to. In the last year or two, my colleague Lisa Guenther has been doing important work on and in prisons, highlighting in particular the ethical and the psychological costs of solitary confinement. And I've asked her to show us something why this work's important here today. And I'm going to ask her shortly to introduce the speakers that she's brought. Lisa Guenther is an associate professor of philosophy here at Vanderbilt. She's a Canadian with a PhD from Toronto 10 years ago. And she's a phenomenologist and a feminist who ranges from teaching the most obscure writings of Husserl all the way to the other end in social activism and organizing prison teaching workshops. She's made an enormous impact on students and colleagues alike in the last 5 years that she's been with us here at Vanderbilt. Her first book, The Gift of Birth, explains how distinctive a gift it is to give life, to create another human, and she critiques from a feminist perspective some of the previous sort of classic philosophical treatments. Her second book, which is kind of more relevant, I guess, for today, currently in press, Social Death and Its Afterlives, is a critique of solitary confinement. I mean, one way of thinking about what the sort of ground of that critique would be to ask whether deprivation of social contact isn't really a form of silent torture. As Lisa will explain, and I think there are other handouts, today's event is part of a series of events focusing on prisons that she's arranged for this fall, which begin here in the library but take place in other places throughout. Is it just the fall or goes on the whole year? But I'd like her now to perhaps just say something about that and also to introduce today's program. Lisa.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you all for coming to this event. It is the first event in a series of events that we're calling A Year of Rethinking Prisons. And the events will mainly take place at Vanderbilt, as David said. They engage with topics raised by mass incarceration and the connections between mass incarceration and racism, slavery, also solitary confinement, and the death penalty. And so I have a series, a bunch of handouts here that are on the table next to some books that the library had put out to display, books related to prisons and solitary confinement and the death penalty. And so I encourage you to take a handout. I have some here if at the end of the program you want to just take one from me. And I also want to direct your attention to the TADP, Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty table outside. They have some information about efforts here in Tennessee to abolish the death penalty. But I just want to turn it over to our two speakers, Ndume Olatushani, who spent 20 years on Tennessee's death row for a crime he didn't commit and was released from prison just 3 months ago, and Anne-Marie Moyes, who met Ndume around 20 years ago, I believe, doing work with prisoners on death row and became one of his strongest advocates. And so I invite them to tell their story, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you for having us. I thought that I would start and talk for about 10 or 15 minutes and just give the story of Ndume's case. Can everybody hear me? Maybe let me turn this up. Okay. Is that better? Yeah, okay. I thought I would start by telling the story of Ndume's case. I was really involved. I was never part of his legal team, though I became a lawyer over the 20 years since I've known him. And so I just was very immersed in the struggle to get him out, and a big part of that. And I thought I'd be the best person to kind of tell his story and just set that backdrop and then turn it over to Ndume and let him tell you about his personal journey of having spent 27 years in prison for something he didn't do. So as Lisa said, I met Ndume in 1992, and at that point he had already been on death row for about 7 or 8 years. And soon after meeting him, he didn't urgently tell me his story, but just over the course of many meetings, he kind of told me the story of his conviction, and I immediately felt deep in my core that there was something very wrong that had happened. And I wasn't a lawyer at the time. I was pretty naive about the system, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out things that I could do to try to improve his circumstance. So let me just start by telling you the story of the crime. The crime that Ndume was convicted of was a felony murder, and that just means that it was a murder that took place during the course of a felony. And in most states, even if the murder itself wasn't premeditated, just because the felony was premeditated, you could be subject to both the death penalty and a life sentence just for having participated in a felony during which somebody was killed. So the crime that he was convicted of took place in Memphis. It was a robbery of a grocery store. Several people went into the store and didn't go in intending to kill the store owner who was working one of the registers, but it seems like what happened was one of the perpetrators went up to the store owner at the register, that the store owner ended up having a gun and turned around, was startled by the perpetrator, reached for his gun, and then just within a second it all went bad, and a couple shots were fired by two of the perpetrators, and the store owner was killed. The perpetrators left the store with nothing. So the police soon discovered that the getaway car had been abandoned near the crime scene, and they discovered that the getaway car had been stolen from a rental car agency at the St. Louis airport. And so they immediately started focusing on suspects from the St. Louis area. And Ndume is from St. Louis. He was born and raised there. And the police never really explained, out of all the people in St. Louis, how they zeroed in on him as a suspect. Like, that's not a story. We never really got that explanation. But Ndume did have a criminal history, and for whatever reason, he ended up on their radar. And they very quickly ended up zeroing in and building this case against him. So the case that they put on at trial was basically 4 pieces of evidence. They had one eyewitness of about 10 to 15 people in the store. Of those 10 to 15 eyewitnesses, they had one eyewitness who they brought in to testify who said that he identified Ndume as the shooter and said that he was only about 80% sure of his identification. He had seen the perpetrator very briefly for just a couple seconds as they passed him leaving the store, the perpetrator entering the store. That was the first piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence was there was a boyfriend and girlfriend who, their story was that some people came from St. Louis in the getaway car and visited them in Memphis and stayed at their house the weekend that the crime was committed. Neither one of them actually said that they were present at the crime scene or knew whether Ndume had committed the crime, but they placed him in the getaway car and placed him in Memphis and had him going out to the store right around the time that this robbery occurred. The third piece of evidence was a woman who Ndume had briefly dated, who said that he had confessed to her that he committed a murder in the state of Tennessee and she didn't know anything about it. And the fourth piece of evidence was the police said that they found a partial palm print on the outside of the getaway car that they attributed to Ndume. So those were the 4 pieces of evidence that convicted him. He was tried by an all-white jury in Memphis. The prosecution was able to obtain an all-white jury by using each one of what's called a peremptory strike to exclude all the African Americans that were in the jury pool. So there were African Americans in the pool, but they used all of their available strikes to keep all of those people off of the jury. So he was convicted on that evidence. Then what happened is about a little less than 10 years into the appeal process, he finally got some amazing lawyers on his case, and I actually was somewhat involved in recruiting them, but we got this big New York law firm to agree to take his case pro bono. And they signed in just at the beginning of the state post-conviction process. And for the first time, his lawyers were able to get access to the entire police file and the entire prosecution file in the case. And so for the first time, we were able to see all the evidence that the police had and not just the evidence that they put on at trial. But what we discovered is that they had a mountain of evidence that pointed to an entirely different group of suspects as being the perpetrators. So there's a really significant Supreme Court case called Brady v. Maryland. And what that case says is that the due process clause of the Constitution requires that when the police or the prosecution have that sort of evidence that's called exculpatory evidence, meaning it's evidence that tends to clear you, maybe by pointing to somebody else or just in some way pointing to your innocence, that they have an obligation to turn that over to the defense so that the defendant's lawyer can adequately defend him. And it makes sense because the police have enormous resources to investigate a case. They have access to physical evidence that the defendant doesn't have access to always. They have police laboratories where they can test evidence. The police can go find witnesses and get people to talk to them that a defense attorney might not be able to get to talk to them. So the only way that you can really have a fair trial is if they find that sort of evidence, that they turn it over to you. So the mountain of evidence that they did not turn over to Ndume's lawyer at trial was the following. It was mostly several pieces of evidence that all pointed to this other group of suspects that we've always referred to as the Brown Gang, because it was comprised of Michael Brown, his brother Eric Brown, their cousin by marriage Charles Keller, and two women who prostituted for them. One was named Betty Jo Ford, and the other was Darby Cunningham. So the evidence withheld was that one eyewitness in the store who saw the shooting at close range pointed out a picture. When she was shown a photo array that included Ndume's picture, she picked out a picture of Michael Brown and said that he looked like the shooter. Then the police talked to a teenager who had seen the perpetrators changing license plates on the getaway car, and he went and told his mother that he had seen this suspicious activity going on. She told him, well, go back and pay close attention and make note of what the license plate numbers. So she basically told him to go and really observe and take mental note of what he was seeing. So he told the police, I feel pretty confident that I can pick out these two people that I saw changing the license plate. He's shown the same photo array that includes Ndume's picture. He immediately picks out the photos of Michael Brown and his cousin by marriage, Charles Keller. So they already have a significant amount of evidence pointing to the Brown Gang. But what they also find out is the car, like I said, the getaway car had been stolen from the St. Louis airport, from the Hertz rental car agency. So the police in Memphis call down to St. Louis and they say, we hear that this has been happening often, that these cars have been stolen from the Hertz rental car agency. Who are your suspects in these thefts? They get a fax back. The names on their list of suspects in these thefts are Michael Brown, Eric Brown, Charles Keller, and maybe one other person. So the Memphis police they find out that one of these rental cars, not the getaway car, but a different one, had actually been recovered in Memphis. So they go to that area and they talk to some people, and they find out that the car that had been stolen, the car that was recovered in Memphis that had been stolen from the Hertz agency in St. Louis, that this other car had been recovered in the possession of Eric Brown and his girlfriend. So when they're canvassing that neighborhood, they talk to another neighbor who says, yeah, I did see that car there, but you know what? I also saw the getaway car. And so he says he saw the getaway car parked at Eric Brown's girlfriend's house, one of these prostitutes that worked for the Brown Gang, and he saw members of the Brown Gang driving the car about 3 weeks before the crime was committed that Ndume was convicted of. So they have all of this evidence that points to the Brown Gangs. They, for some reason that we don't totally understand, don't pursue them, but they also don't turn over any of this evidence to Ndume's lawyer so that he could adequately defend himself at trial. We also found out in the course of the post-conviction process a couple of other things that were helpful. The palm print was always a troubling thing for us, that they were claiming they found this palm print on the outside of the getaway car, but within the police reports we found a couple of interesting things. One was that the police had actually made an inventory of every place on the car where they took a print, and mysteriously they did not take a print from the area of the car where they say that they found his palm print. So that was one thing that was a little fishy. Then we also found a police report that showed that they, very early on in their investigation, long before they claimed to have made this match of his palm print, there's a report that says that they checked his prints and that they all came back negative, no matches. But there's a note in a different handwriting on the side margin of the page that says, no palm print submitted. So they ended up having this story that the reason why they matched his palm print so late was that they weren't able to get one of his palm prints. And so that's why it was this kind of late discovery that helped them make a case against him. Well, they say that they couldn't get a palm print, and they named the agencies they tried to get palm prints from. And when we checked those agencies, they said, well, that doesn't make sense because we had a complete print file on him, and anybody that asked for his prints would have been given not just his fingerprints, but a palm print. So there was definitely something not right about the palm print. But there's so many complexities to the case. I hope I'm kind of striking the right balance in the detail I'm going into. But I think I'm going to leave it at that for the evidence that was withheld. So we had all of this evidence, and we were kind of excited. We thought, wow, how can a court not say that something fundamentally wrong happened at this trial? Well, we went through the entire Tennessee court system, and what they said is, we agree all this evidence was withheld. We agree it was exculpatory, but we don't think it was material. We don't think that if you had had this evidence at your trial, we feel like we're not concerned that the jury would have reached a different verdict. So the standard is you have to prove that it was withheld, that it was exculpatory, and that if you had had this evidence, that the outcome might have been different at your trial. And they said, no, we're not convinced that that even may have been true. But what they did do is they ended up overturning his penalty. So they overturned the death penalty. And it was a long, drawn-out sort of struggle, but eventually the state agreed not to seek the death penalty again, and they voluntarily just conceded to a life sentence with the possibility of parole. So at that point, we were poised to go into federal court for the first time. But I had decided at some point that I was going to investigate the case and try to find out more evidence of Ndume's innocence. So I spent a couple years going down to Memphis, a lot of weekends. I traveled all over the country tracking down witnesses. And I ended up finding out 2 critical new pieces of evidence that finally kind of pushed us over the tipping point. One of them was that one of the kind of key witnesses against Ndume, this woman that said that he was at her house, this couple that said he was at their house that weekend, that he was in the getaway car, he had gone out to the grocery store that morning. So she, strongly ties him to the crime. I ended up finding out that she was actually a childhood friend of a member of the Brown gang. That they had, when I talked to witnesses, they said when you saw one, you saw the other, that they were always together. So now we were able to do 2 things. We were able to show that, one, she had a huge motive to lie and deflect attention from who the true perpetrators probably were. And then if, in fact, the true perpetrators were at her house that weekend, it further implicates the Brown gang as being the true perpetrators. So that was one thing I found out. Then her boyfriend, who had also placed him in Memphis, ended up recanting. And he told me that the police put enormous pressure on him to get him to tell this story, that it wasn't true, that he had felt guilty about it for many years for any role that he played in it. So we presented this now additional new evidence in state court in something called a quorum nobis proceeding. And finally, in December of 2011, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Ndume's conviction. In the spring of 2012, the Tennessee Supreme Court refused to hear the state's appeal of that overturning. And on June 1st, he was finally released from the Memphis County Jail. Interestingly, some of these innocence cases don't always end in a really pretty way. And what happened was, once his conviction was overturned, they sent him back to the Shelby County Jail. And it became clear very quickly that the prosecutor's office down there was going to play hardball, and they were going to try to keep him locked up for a couple years pending a trial. But they came out to him with an offer where if he entered something called an Alford plea to a lesser charge of second-degree murder, that they would let him out that day. And so an Alford plea allowed Ndume to go in court and say, I'm not pleading guilty to this offense, I maintain my innocence, but I believe that this deal is in my best interest. And so he took this deal, and that enabled him to walk out of jail about 1 or 2 years earlier than he otherwise would. And that's how the story ended. And now I'm gonna let Ndume speak about his experience, his personal experience of taking this amazing journey.
Well, thanks, and I'm happy to be here as well too. And I don't know if I can do as good a job as she did. You guys, at the end of this, you might know why I was so lucky to have her as my wife. But like she said, and I just kind of pick up this where she left off when I was in the Memphis County Jail, because it wasn't an easy decision that we actually made for me to actually enter into this plea. We thought about it and just went through this process of trying to figure out what was the best thing for us. And I think the last 90 days certainly didn't prove to us that it was the right thing to do, rather than just standing on principle and possibly sitting in the Memphis County Jail or being separated for another year or two. So I actually did do that. And like I said, the last 90 days certainly then demonstrated to me and to her that we certainly made the right decision. But in terms of my personal journey, I think that even though that she kind of explained what she what she did, I think that it kind of belies how the important role that she actually played, because like she said, Lisa said earlier, we actually been together for 20 years, and that having her in my life really was certainly one of the anchors that kind of kept me grounded and kept me focused. And I mean, aside from the fact that I was sitting in prison for a crime that I didn't commit, and wasn't giving up on the fact that one day that I would be out of there, but it was definitely her, and that really kind of carried me through this thing in a whole lot of ways. And I mean, aside from a lot of people, but I think that for me, in terms of, you know, when you talk about my personal journey, like everybody said that I actually spent 20 years on death row. I don't know, I think that in order to try to wrap your mind around sitting in prison, first off for a crime that I ain't commit, but also too, being faced with the prospect of death, I think probably the closest people can maybe come to that is you was in a situation where people was telling you, the doctors was maybe telling you that you had a certain amount of time to live. And once I was, you know, kind of put in this position, I think that probably like a lot of people that may have some medical issues where doctors are telling them that, you begin to think about life and things, life in a total different way. Because now for me, I was thinking about if in fact that I did end up being executed for a crime I ain't committed, how did I want to actually spend the last time that I would actually have based on what they was actually telling me, even though that I never really kind of believed or accepted that would be my fate. But I also too realized and understood that I was sitting where I was sitting. So when it's like what Lisa was talking about, this solitary confinement, and I just try to give a brief description about what Tennessee death row looked like. That when you first go to land on Unit 2, which is River Bend Maximum Security Institution, which is the housing unit for death row, that you actually spend 23 hours a day in a cell. I think it's probably about 12, maybe about 8 by 10, either 8 by 12. So you got your person is actually sitting in this cell with virtually nothing when you go in there, because it's a process in terms of actually receiving whatever it is that you receive, whether it be a TV, radio, or whatever little old, you know, material things that you can actually possess. But and I know Lisa and maybe other people that have went out there, that when you go out there to the prison, you see these kind of manicured lines, and I mean, but for the fences, it look almost like a college campus. But the truth is that when you have, I mean, the mental deprivations that some people go through, or I should say that everybody go through, I think that some people, you know, deal with it different. But, you know, I was fortunate enough to, I hope, maintain some sanity, but you know, I certainly witnessed other guys that, you know, based on the deprivations that they were subjected to, ended up on medication, you know, just, and I often give this example of this guy that I actually know. I mean, when I took my GED while I was on death row, and this guy actually helped me with my math, because he was, I mean, this guy was a genius with math. But one day we was coming out to the yard. They had these small cages. You had these small cages, probably about maybe 20 by 20, that this is used for the rec yard. So you in this cage that I don't think nobody with any heart would actually put a dog in. But I went out to the yard one day, and I actually walked past him, the guy that I'm talking about. I actually walked past him, and I spoke to him like I would do every time I seen him out there. But that particular morning when I spoke to him, he had like this blank stare on his face, almost as if he was seeing me for the first time. And I realized later on, before we went out to the yard, that something in his mind just had clicked, and he wasn't the same person. And that was, I think that was one of the first situations that really let me understand and know how people, if you didn't maintain, if you was not able to maintain your sanity, what could actually happen. I think that I think most of us probably know it, even though the mind is probably the most powerful thing on this earth, it's actually also too real fragile. And for that particular day, he actually let me know. And since then, what I learned, I know that they actually give them these shots monthly. They give them a shot once a month, and this shot actually keeps them from keeps them sane. And so, but what I was able to do while I was there, I immersed myself in everything that I possibly could to just try to stay focused and be connected to the outside. And I don't know if some of you guys, when you came in, you see the artwork out there. That was one of the things that I actually taught myself, you know, as a way of just trying to break up the time and space of actually sitting there, that I taught myself how to paint, and I read a lot, and actually once, also too, I would mention that the only things at the time when I was actually on death row, classes that you can actually participate in was you can get the GED class, unless you, or if you had some opportunity to take some type of correspondence course, you can actually do that if you had people outside helping you do that. Other than that, that was the only class that I was actually able to be involved in while I was actually on Unit 2. But once I left Unit 2 and went to Unit 6, which is the general population in a maximum security institution, so, but that was general population. Once I was able to get down there, I was actually was able to get involved in some different classes that was brought out by several universities. Vanderbilt is one of them. MTSU, I was involved in one of them, and I was also too involved with a class that Lipscomb's University brought out as well too. So, so these, when I talk about my personal experience and how I was able to survive, and like I said, hopefully come out whole, is I just spent a lot of time being involved in every possible class, or sitting down reading a book, or doing whatever I needed to do to just try to maintain some sanity and not just kind of be sucked into this this hole of despair, really, because I think it's easy to it's certainly easy to do if a person is not able to maintain some sense of sanity. So you know, I mean, other than that, I don't know that I can add much more to she said about my personal legal situation, but you know, just trying to survive, sitting there being faced with death. It was people like Anne Marie and other good people that came and got involved in my life and just extended their hand to me in friendship, and just kind of kept me focused and let me know that there was certainly a different world outside here waiting on me, and there was good people that wanted the best for me and didn't want nothing from me because I ain't have nothing. So I mean, other than that, I don't know what else I can add to that right now.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing your stories. And I love, yeah. I love what you said, Ndume, about the mind being both a powerful thing and a fragile thing. Because I think when we put these two stories together, this is what I understand, that there's this enormous human capacity to be facing death and yet to find meaning, and even to be compelled to find meaning in the situation that has you basically stuck in a cage or in a 12 by 10 box.
Right.
And at the same time, this system that your story is extraordinary, and we only heard a slice of all of the different aspects of the withholding of evidence and different legal difficulties that you faced right up to the end. And so we have both a testament to the strength of the human mind to make it through this system and to emerge from the other side by having connections with other people and strengthening those connections and developing your talents for art and for thought and for reflection. And at the same time, we have this system that seems to fail not only the people who are caught inside of it, but all of us, to the extent that this is our system, this is our justice system. So I just want to open up with these reflections, to open up to the audience any questions that you would like to ask Ndume or Anne-Marie, and we have a microphone up here, so maybe if people want to come up so that everybody can hear the questions, that'd be great. Oh, we also have mobile mics. Wonderful.
Okay. My name is David Philippi. I'm a retired prison chaplain in the Tennessee Department of Correction. Currently, I and my church are very active at Riverbend on Unit 2. My wife, Carol, and Peggy to my left, we received into membership at Trinity Presbyterian Church, a member of Unit 2 Death Row, and that was the second member that's joined our church, Trinity Presbyterian Church, on Unit 2 Death Row. I conduct a study group out there on Thursdays at 2:45 by means of background. Our church and I'm very active in both boots on the ground in prisons and systemic change issues. If anyone's interested in that, be glad to talk to anybody because I actively recruit. So, I've done a little bit of research since 2003 on Unit 2 Death Row, and this is not precise, but it's pretty accurate. In April 2003, there were plus or minus about 95 men on Death Row Unit 2. I'm not going to go over all of this information, but the last part of it is significant. Out of that group, 3 were exonerated and released totally free. 1 was released on the Alford plea before you, which is a 4% rate of innocent people that ended up on death row and were released. That means that any one of them theoretically could have been executed. Most of them stay not for a few years, but 20 and 30 years. They have certainly been executed in places like Texas and in other states. Innocent people have been executed. I simply highlight that as a means of thinking about that. I'll share that information, as I said before we met. I'll share this paper with you, and if anyone else wants it, I can send it to you by email as a Word document. So I want to thank you for what you have presented, and we are with you.
Thank you.
Just want to share that.
You know, if I could add something to that, I feel like there's, if people take one thing from our story, I feel like something that's so important for me, for people to understand, is that Ndume is sitting here not because the system works, but because a crazy person got involved in his case. And,
That's right.
And, just did this amount of work that, and just was like working for 20 years to like make something happen that was kind of a miracle. Like even despite my work, I feel like it was a miracle. But there are tons of other Ndumes. Maybe I shouldn't say tons, but there are too many other Ndumes sitting in prison who don't have somebody like me. And so, when you look at a statistic like 4 out of 95, those are only the people that were lucky, and there are other people in there that don't have somebody. They didn't have the New York law firm come and spend thousands of hours and spend millions of dollars representing him. They didn't have me, advocating him on the fringes and these other ways and investigating his case and helping this team of lawyers get on in the first place. So I think it's just really important to keep that in mind.
just while the mic is traveling. Oh, there it is. But I just wanted to say that I also work in Unit 2 at Riverbend, and I facilitate a discussion group with people that Ndume is friends with. Right. And these are extraordinary people. Some of them are innocent and some of them are not. And even the ones who committed the crime that they were accused of are not the same people that they were 20 years ago when they committed that crime. Mm-hmm. And I think our system has to take account of, especially when we expect people to rehabilitate and transform themselves in prison, if we don't have a way of responding to those transformations when they take place, then our system is broken on that level too.
Yep, I completely agree. So I really appreciate hearing your story, and I have actually a question for each of you. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about why you took such an interest in this case, like sort of on the front end, and then a little bit more sort of about your love story and like how that ended up developing, and when you know, gazed across each other at a table or something. I don't know. However that unfolded, in not too much detail. But then the other part for you, Ndume, is 27 years is a tremendous amount of time to spend outside of society. And so I would love to hear about your experience and how you remember things, the outside world sort of being when you first went in versus like when you came out. Like what did you see that shocked you? What stayed the same? What were you not surprised about? You know, like what, just how different was it for you when you first came out?
I'll start back, answer this question first, and that is I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest thing that for me is technology. I mean, in the last 30 years, technology exponentially just and grown. I mean, when I was in prison, the internet didn't even exist. And so, and while I was in prison, I really didn't have no access to the internet, or you really don't have access to no computers. They used to actually allow us to have typewriters in prison, but they actually took them out of the system. I think that, you know, even though that they used it as a security reason, I think that they probably took them out of the prison because people that sit in prison that have access to typewriters and actually use them, or people usually challenging the system as technology. I'm gonna cut this phone off, and I'm still learning this little phone. But I think that in terms of just coming home, I think that because I never felt like I belonged in prison. And so coming home, it was like the first time I got back under driving a car, it was like it was never gone from it. Even though that, I think that the biggest thing for me in terms of when I look out and kind of gets perspective on the amount of time is when I look at, you know, people. Like one of the things, when she talked about this law firm that represented me, this guy, David, is a great friend of mine. He actually worked on my case for 17 years, and he has a 16-year-old daughter. I remember his daughter was born, and he was actually given an award up in New York for the work that he actually did on my case, pro bono work that his law firm did on my case, and I was fortunate enough to actually to go up there and be with him when he actually received the award. And while I was there, I actually met his daughter. So that was kind of this visual, you know, kind of visual reminder about what 16 or 17 years is, because I remember when she was born and had pictures of her. And so to actually see her, so it was like this, this kind of shift in my mind based on what I knew based on the picture versus actually seeing it. And in some ways, it's been that way when I went back to St. Louis, because like Anne Marie said, I was actually born and raised in St. Louis, and because I didn't know nothing or don't know nothing about Nashville, I'm still getting lost driving around. But seeing stuff in Nashville, it's all new to me anyway. So, but when I go back home to St. Louis, I see things that changed, and you know, so that's pretty much been, you know, kind of this whole transition. I haven't been having any transitional issues, I mean mental ones anyway, but that's pretty much, I just kind of fell right back in. It's like I should have been here all along, really. Yeah.
So in terms of the part of the question, to me, one fact that I left out when I told the story initially is at trial, Ndume actually did put on a defense, and the defense was an alibi defense. He had never been to the state of Tennessee before he was brought down here to stand trial. And the weekend that the crime happened early on a Sunday morning. And that Saturday was his mother's birthday, and his family threw a large party for his mother that night, that Saturday night, in honor of her birthday. And there were about 30 people who were all available to testify that Ndume was in St. Louis that whole weekend. And some of them talked about seeing him at the party, others talked about seeing him Sunday morning after the party, but the weekend was just significant in people's memories because there had been this big party and everybody remembered it. And he had a not very effective trial lawyer who only organized about 6 of those witnesses to come to trial, and not the best of the 30. I mean, yeah, but not the best of the 30. But that was one of the facts when I first met Ndume, that I learned that, and I'm like, how can this possibly be? I mean, it was in this very naive way, but you have 30 people that say you were somewhere else, like, how can this be? And so, you know, that was one thing that kind of drew me in at the beginning. But I think more than that, you know, sometimes, I don't know, Ndume has me reading this book now called Blink. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but I never thought of it in connection to this, but sometimes there's something you just know in your gut, and, you know, there's ways that your subconscious just senses things, you know, that, you know, are truth. And I just knew in my gut that what he was saying was true, and it was something about, you know, his telling of the story and not having like this urgent need to desperately convince you. It was just that there was this deep inner peace of this being the truth, and no sort of desperate need for you to believe it. It was just the truth. And there's just a way of our connection that I just knew that he didn't do this. And, you know, over time, I just felt more and more compelled to do something to try to help.
I'd like to ask just a quick question of each of them. And Anne-Marie, I'd like to ask you whether you think there are changes in the way justice is done. That, I mean, rules and procedures and that would make it less likely that a miscarriage like this would happen. And the question I'd like to ask, just to get this on the table of Ndume, is I don't know, knowing that you were innocent, how did that affect, because there were a lot of other people in solitary, let's say, who knew that they were not innocent, and would experience it maybe in a slightly different way. I just imagine, and I'm sure a lot of the audience here can imagine, we think that if we're innocent, we couldn't possibly be in jail, because we would just tell people the truth and they'd understand. But then you find yourself, and it's not just a dream, actually in jail, and you didn't do it. I mean, what about anger? You see, I'm interested in the fact that you don't seem angry now. But no, maybe you're just so relieved to be out. But I'm trying to imagine how you deal with the reality that just should not be like this. And the obvious first response would surely be outrage and anger. Anyway, so that I thought.
Yeah, no, you answer first. And
okay.
Right. In the first couple of years, I was angry. The first couple of years, I was angry, and I probably was most angry when I sit in court and the jury came back and convicted me. But I think that after the first couple of years, actually my mother was killed in a car accident, and it was through that process that I found myself that I was truly a broken man at that point, even though that I had kind of suffered, was sitting where I was sitting in prison like I was. But that was the kind of this turning point for me, that when I lost my mother, that just kind of, like I said, shattered me, and I had to pick myself up from that. And I think it was through that process that I was able to just kind of free myself from the anger of being in prison and sitting on death row for a crime I ain't committed. And I also too knew that in order for me to survive it and improve and be sitting here where I'm sitting here now, I had to just kind of let that go, let the anger go. Or I shouldn't say let it go, but redirect my anger and, toward this, this truth. And so, that's, and in doing that, I freed myself, because even though that I sit in prison for right at 28 years, I feel fortunate in so many ways that even though a lot was taken from me, I certainly gained a lot. I got my wife and just family, and and was able to, I think, do things that had I not been kind of caged in the way that I was, that I probably wouldn't have allowed myself the opportunity to do it. Like I mentioned my order earlier, I like to tell people that I was an artist before I went to prison. I just hadn't had an opportunity to actually sit down and let that creative side of me, come out. So, and I ain't saying that people should go to prison to become an artist. But it's, like I said, in so many ways, I found myself most fortunate. I talked about a little bit, like I said, of just kind of seeing people in the same position that I was. And I knew even then that sitting there with them that I was fortunate, that in a lot of ways I had people, like I said, extending their hand to me. I had my family, I had so many things that I looked around and other people didn't have. And so that kind of let me know how fortunate I was.
What about the justices?
Yeah. There's another thing I feel very strongly about, but I think one thing that's very troubling about our country's reaction to the many innocence cases that have come out in the wake of DNA exonerations, because it really is this very sort of unique point in history where suddenly you had the advent of this new technology that just in an instant could show whether somebody's guilt was actually innocent or not. And then what it revealed is, if in this very conclusive way you can show, oh my goodness, this person absolutely did not do this, then you can look at what evidence convicted them, and it gives you kind of this window into seeing what was unreliable about certain forms of evidence. I mean, you can see how, confessions are coerced. You can see the incredible unreliability of eyewitness testimony. You can see about the dangers of what you could call like purchase testimony or jailhouse informant testimony. I mean, there's these patterns you see in innocence cases. And what have we done in response to that? There are definitely things that can be done, and a tiny fraction, if anything, depending on jurisdiction, has been done in response to this amazing wealth of information that we've gained in this DNA sort of revolution. But just in terms of Ndume's case, I mean, one thing is that there are social scientists who have done incredible research about eyewitness identification and things that can be done to reduce the risk of error. Like, one thing that you can do is if an eyewitness is being shown an array of pictures, the law enforcement individual that's working with them should not know who the suspect is. Because even if they try to be completely ethical in not letting that person know in certain ways who they want them to pick, there's ways that people sense it in body language, like, are you sure? Or like being very happy when they hesitantly pick out a picture and reinforcing that. And so, there's just simple things like that that could be done that are not being done. And another thing in Ndume's case is you see a pattern in a good number of innocence cases about evidence being withheld. And right now we have a system where there's virtually no consequence for prosecutors who engage in that conduct. I mean, very rarely you see a consequence. And so, I mean, I think there are things that could be done systemically, and I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, there have been so many exonerations, and it hasn't yet been enough to see really broad, significant changes. But I think it's going to take a lot more advocacy from people that are concerned about this to make that happen.
I would just add to that, I think that when she talked about the prosecutors, I think that what a lot of people don't know, prosecutors are the most powerful people in the justice system, and I think for them to have, this complete immunity, I think I think that if prosecutors knew that they were subject to a criminal charge, that they probably wouldn't do some of the things that they actually do, because even though that I didn't certainly let go, you know, any animus that I had toward the people that actually did what they did to me, I'm talking about the people in the system, I wouldn't be mad if the prosecutors that and the police that did what they did to me, if they sit in prison for a few years. I think that, you know, if there were consequences, criminal consequences, that prosecutors face, I think that things would be much different in terms of them standing on their legal obligation to actually turn over evidence, and certainly not be fabricating evidence and doing some of the things that that they did to me. Everything that could have went wrong in a criminal trial went wrong in my trial.
But you know, even aside from criminal penalties, you know, there are some mechanisms where a prosecutor could be punished within, like the Bar Association, you know, like there could be a professional consequence, and that rarely happens. It's extremely rare. I was telling somebody recently that the only case I know there was a really serious sanction was in the case of the Duke lacrosse players, where they withheld some really serious evidence in that case. And the reason why there was a serious sanction is you had these very wealthy kids that were the victims of their misconduct. And so they had parents that were really angry about what happened and demanded that there be a consequence. But in most cases, it happens to somebody that's fairly powerless. And so there just isn't a consequence. And you know, these prosecutors, it's just another conviction that makes them look good, and they rise up in the ranks and they become judges. And you know, why should they regret what they did? I mean, even in Ndume's case, he was offered a deal at the time he went to trial where they offered him 25 or 30 years, and he refused it. Well, they got their 25 to 30 years out of him, so what do they lose in this process? I mean, they didn't lose anything.
Do we have any prosecutors in the audience? No, I mean, I'm interested. We might. We've had judges in the past. No? Ex-prosecutors? No. Okay. I think we do have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, actually, people that with criminal charges, and yes, my charge is certainly one of those charges that I would have to list. And there's been all type of, I think that, I mean, it's what's going on today based on this criminal conviction is just really legalized discrimination. And so, yeah, I've run into, you know, just some resistance based on that charge, yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe that depends on the jury you have and what their mindset is. You know, I mean, they're certainly instructed in the process of trying a case. A jury is reminded of that numerous times, you know, probably more than once or twice. You know, that the burden is on the government, you know, to prove guilt. Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question where I think that, you know, sometimes human beings are more or less capable of doing that. But certainly once you're convicted, that completely shifts, and you know, all the burdens are on you to try to get out from under this huge rock.
Just one last question.
I just want to ask the question, both of you as a couple and as individual, what do you expect for your future? What do you want? What are some of your goals for the future? And then individually, since y'all conquered this Goliath, what do y'all want to do for your life, for other people?
And I just thought well, I'm trying to housebreak a puppy that we got. So that's been getting me up 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the morning and back up at 6. But one of the things that I certainly hope to be doing is, you know, trying to do some prison outreach stuff and just try to be involved in organizations and with individuals and organizations that trying to do, I mean, it's like she said about guys getting out of prison and just trying to transition back into society, because I think that people fail to realize that most people in prison coming home, and we have to make a decision about how you want them to come home. I think that, from my experience, I think that what I done seen most all is people leaving prison want to stay out of prison, but and have good intentions of doing that. But when they get back out into society and face the type of job discrimination, housing, and all these different things that they up against, that people quickly revert back to the old activity. So I certainly want to be involved in trying to, you know, just do something about that. In fact, we got Blue down there for real. I call him Blue. That's but he actually spent 25 years in prison. He was actually on death row with me as well too, and he's been out here, and I intend to get with him and others that's out here doing good work like they've been doing, just trying to help guys getting out of prison. And we actually in the process of just trying to create a stronger nonprofit organization to do exactly that. So
I guess the only thing I would add is I do think we want to, you know, just tell our story like in situations like this, and just hope that maybe there's things that can be gained from people, you know, seeing that these things are still happening, you know, that happened, you know, to him and are continuing to happen, and maybe be part of, you know, the movement to create some level of change in the system.
Hey, can I make one more quick comment? A couple of things, actually. What I want to say is that what wasn't said is that the only eyewitness that was used against me at my trial came in and testified at my trial that the police showed them several pictures of nobody but me and told them that I was the person. And they also, too, offered me the 25 years, but based on the fact that I was standing on the fact that I hadn't committed the crime, that I was subject to the power of the system, that even though that they felt like, okay, that I was, if I pleaded guilty, that they would give me 25 years, but after I exercised my right to go to trial based on the fact that I hadn't committed the crime, then the same charge was I was subject to the death penalty. And having a jury, when you're talking about jury and people sitting up in there, should be based on what the system's saying, that you innocent until proven guilty. That if I had one eyewitness saying that the people showed them several pictures of me and told them I was the person, surely the jury should have had some sense to say that, okay, even though that we want to convict this person, we shouldn't subject him to the death penalty. But they actually did that. And Stacy is out there and got the table set up out here, and I would encourage everybody, when you go out here, get involved, pick up some of the literature, and if you haven't taken a position on the death penalty, I hope you will, because I'm saying it actually does kill innocent people. That's just a fact. And anytime, as long as the system is in place, it's gonna kill innocent people. Like Anne Marie said, I'm here in spite of the system, not because of it.
I'd like to thank all of our guests today, and just remind you that we're meeting in the public library, which seems to be like the opposite of solitary confinement. It's a place where the doors are open, anyone can come in and go and borrow and be educated, and I'd just like to remind us all what a wonderful place this is.
Thank you everyone for coming, and if you would like a list of the upcoming events about prisons, the death penalty, and solitary confinement, I have handouts here, and there are also more out on the table.